Wikipedia defines astroturf organizations as the practice of hiding the sponsors of a message or organization to make it appear as though it originates from and is supported by grassroots participants. It is a practice intended to give the statements or organizations credibility by withholding information about the source's financial backers. One of the things that Conservatives have done a truly remarkable job of cultivating is a media apparatus that blurs the lines between news, advocacy, and straight-up propaganda. Conservative news organizations often don't just report what they perceive to be news, they also generate narratives that they reinforce through repetition, which in turn provides political cover for politicians who then use those stories to justify policies that otherwise wouldn't have necessarily gotten public support. One of the hallmarks of these conservative news organizations seems to be that the biggest ones are published and controlled by political operatives. True North has Candace Malcolm, who worked directly for Smith with the Wild Rose and Jason Kenney at the federal level. Another political operative turned news entertainer is Ezra Levant. And we can't talk about what we're going to talk about tonight without talking about Ezra Levant. For the uninitiated, Ezra Levant is a central figure in many of the rage-farming astroturf organizations that present themselves as news, even though Levant has testified in court that he is not a journalist. From a 2014 trial, Mr. Levant testified to a judge, "I'm a commentator, I'm a pundit, I don't think in my entire life I've ever called myself a reporter." That was in 2014, which is actually relevant because while Levant was at the time working at Sun TV, he had a few other gigs before then. And one of them was called the Western Standard. Levant founded the Western Standard as the successor to the conservative magazine The Alberta Report in 2004. The Western Standard started as a print magazine focused on Western Canadian and conservative politics, but the magazine lasted only about 3 years in print before moving briefly to an online platform at roughly the same time that Levant sold it to Matthew Johnson, an aide to a conservative MP, after which the Western Standard completely folded. And that could have been the end of the Western Standard, but it wasn't. Which brings us to Derek. Born in Ottawa in 1985, Derek Fildebrandt got into politics and conservative advocacy at a young age. At 23, he was a policy analyst for the BC Public Service for 9 months before he began his stint with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, first starting as a national research director before moving to Alberta in 2012 as the Alberta Communications Director. So to be clear, Derek has only been in Alberta for just under a decade and a half, but in that time, he's done a remarkable job of branding himself as one of the biggest voices that speak for Alberta. After his term ended with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Derek made the jump to elected politics and sought the nomination for the Wild Rose for the constituency of Strathmore Brooks. Derek won that seat in the 2015 election with 52% of the vote. But Derek's political career wasn't without significant scandal. In 2016, then Wild Rose leader Brian Jean kicked Derek out of caucus for 4 days after Derek responded positively to a Facebook post of a derogatory comment about then Ontario Liberal Premier Kathleen Wynne, who is gay, which said, "Mr. Wynne," or whatever the hell she identifies as. Derek replied to that with, "Proud to have constituents like you." But that wasn't the first time Derek would get booted. More on that later. That same year also saw some legal problems for Derek. In September of 2016, a neighbor of Derek's witnessed him backing into her vehicle and then driving away. Derek offered a variety of explanations and excuses in court, initially even opting to defend himself, before getting a lawyer who reportedly called Derek a fool, in a manner of speaking. According to Press Progress, Calgary-based lawyer Dale Fedorchuk offered a blunt one-line response in a media scrum, reportedly telling journalists gathered at an Edmonton courthouse that a person who represents himself has a fool for a client. It seemed, though, that it was too little too late, as Derek was ultimately convicted after the court determined that he had indeed hit and run. The following year also saw more legal problems for Derek. In the fall of 2017, he was found on private land trespassing after having shot a deer. from a 2017 article in the Edmonton Journal. Fildebrandt said he found out the land was private after he shot and tagged the deer and apologized to the landowner. Afterwards, he said he donated the deer to a local food bank. The justice official said the seized deer was donated by the wildlife officer. But those weren't the only problems that Derek had in 2017. In August, Derek found himself in hot water with the public and his party when it came out that when he wasn't in Edmonton using it, he had been renting out the apartment the taxpayers were paying for as part of his MLA living allowance. Also in August, Alberta Party leader Greg Clark called out Derek for double dipping while claiming meals while also claiming a per diem designed to pay for meals. It wasn't much money, less than $200, but two stories of the former Canadian Taxpayer Federation watchdog who was responsible for making sure politicians were responsible with taxpayers' money getting himself more than what some people believed he was entitled to led to him resigning from the UCP caucus. In 2018, Derek's time with the UCP was sealed when he pled guilty to unlawful possession of wildlife in the deer shooting incident, and Jason Kenney made it clear there would be no opportunity for Derek to come back. And while Derek is many things, he's certainly not a quitter. In July of 2018, Derek formed the Freedom Conservative Party and began the work of building a party that could challenge the UCP for the Conservative mantle in Alberta. In 2019, the FCP ran 24 candidates across the province and received 9,945 votes, representing 0.52% of votes cast. Of that 9,945, Derek received 1,683 in his race against UCP candidate Leela Ahir. She received 15,612. Derek resigned from the FCP leadership, saying, "Honestly, I'm happy to be done with politics. I'm happy to have my family back, to have a sense of private life back." But Derek's desire for a private life or a life outside of the spotlight didn't last more than a few months. Because just a few months later, in October of 2019, Derek Fildebrandt bought the bones of the Western Standard and willed the publication back to life as an online entity. Which brings us to what tonight's episode is really about. Because we need to have a talk about the Western Standard. In its launch, Derek made a point of making sure it was known that the Western Standard had a clear, self-appointed mandate.
We've had a tremendous success here providing an independent media voice for Western Canada, not supported by any government subsidies. We refuse to take it, but supported by members of the Western Standard. You can go onto the membership section of westernstandardonline.com, become a regular a monthly contributor, because if you want to see this kind of thing, people have to pay to help keep it going.
Derek's argument was that legacy journalism wasn't doing the job of journalists largely because they accepted government subsidies or bailouts or just government money. The argument that the Western Standard repeatedly made was that if a news organization took government money in any form, they were compromised. If an organization in any way relied on government money to operate, they couldn't be trusted. Federal subsidies were the end of objective journalism. But let's let Derek and the Western Standard speak for themselves.
As taxpayers, we're forced to pay billions of dollars every year to support the liberal CBC. But now even the non-government-owned mainstream media are on the take, receiving hundreds of millions of dollars a year in a massive taxpayer bailout from the federal government. This means that even those few bright spots of independence and free thinking in the mainstream media are now on the government dole and cannot speak without fear that the government could pull their funding at any time. We refuse to accept a penny of the big media bailout that has corrupted Canada's once free press. Because we are one of the only genuinely independent media in Canada, we are able to speak freely and cannot be cancelled by Ottawa. Our reporters and columnists are fearless and work tirelessly to give you straight news and cut through the spin. Supporting independent media with your membership is the price of having any media left in this country that isn't on the government take. If you want there to be any independent Western media left, then we need you to step up and support it. Without people like you supporting independent media, all that will be left is the corrupt, government-owned, and government-funded press.
Now, it's worth noting that as much as conservative astroturf groups repeat the claim that because the CBC receives government funding that they're under the thumb of Justin Trudeau, no federal government, whether it's liberal or conservative, has ever had editorial control over the CBC. It's also worth emphasizing that the foundation of any democracy is a well-informed electorate, and to many reasonable people, an arm's length investment in ensuring that quality journalism can continue isn't just dumping money into a dying industry, it's literal investment in preserving democracy. So to be clear, the Western Standard wants you to subscribe to them because they believe that accepting any government funding compromises journalistic integrity, and any outlet that does accept money from a government can't fully be trusted. If we're going to do a deep dive on the Western Standard, though, we need to break that dive down into a few sections and ask three fundamental questions. What sort of content does the Western Standard produce, and is it actually journalism? How does the Western Standard fund its efforts? And does the Western Standard meet its own standards? At first look, there's a few faces to the Western Standard. First of all is their paywalled website. That website offers both news and editorial content. That there is a clear bias in their reporting is pretty clear, as a good number of their news stories start with a premise, and then the story reinforces that premise. But how accurate is the Western Standard in their reporting? Well, there have been a few problems. On June 9th, 2021, the Western Standard published a story alleging that then Premier Jason Kenney took part in dinners at a downtown restaurant while indoor dining was banned by public health order. It also alleged Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro and Environment and Parks Minister Jason Nixon had been there too. A day later, Kenney called out the story and issued a cease and desist to the Western Standard, demanding an apology. On June 17th, after doubling down, Derek Fildebrandt issued that apology, which has since been deleted. But of course, the internet is forever. Presumably, it was deleted, though, because of the Western Standard's strong commitment to fact-based and accurate reporting of history. In February of 2023, the Western Standard reporter/creative writer Arthur C. Green wrote a story that claimed that a parent in Calgary was enraged after their daughter saw a trans woman changing in a washroom. This story sparked significant outrage towards the trans community and is part of a pattern of inflammatory articles by the Western Standard specifically targeting the trans community. The Calgary Police Service took the unusual step of publicly disavowing the story, saying it had been investigated with no evidence found. The Western Standard did report that CPS denied it, but then repeated the entire story by the family as fact. It's also probably worth noting that in that series of stories, Arthur changed who had complained from initially being the father to the mother to the father. Arthur also used a posting on an internet bulletin board to justify a story on WD-40 being banned in Canada, which prompted WD-40 to issue a public statement saying it absolutely wasn't true. Arthur C. Green also had a habit of not only writing stories stigmatizing the houseless and drug users, while he pushed a narrative of addiction being the primary driver of deaths and not the toxic supply, apparently ignoring all evidence to the contrary. But he also had a habit of taking pictures of houseless and homeless individuals in compromising positions without their permission. Where's Art now? He's the press secretary to the Minister of Public Safety, Mike Ellis. As a general rule, the editorial policy of the Western Standard could be interpreted by some as make the most sensational version of the story as possible and deal with the consequences later. And that's the news side. The editorial side is even more hyperbolic. In the run-up to the 2023 election, pundit Rahim Mohammed penned an extremely inflammatory opinion piece where he loaded the article with harmful queer, transphobic tropes and dog whistles, paying zero mind to the damage that the words would do to thousands across Alberta and beyond. The article has since been deleted, so how do we know what was in the article? Because that's directly from Mr. Mohammed's apology, which has also since been deleted. But the greater point is that the editorial control that exists for the Western Standard appears to be so low that it allowed an opinion piece loaded with harmful queer, transphobic tropes and dog whistles to be published in the first place. In fact, Mr. Mohammed has since stated it was at his request that the article was deleted. The deletion wasn't done by the Western Standard because of those reasons. Some might even suggest it was published exactly for those reasons. The position of the Western Standard leadership are quite remarkable for their flexibility, though. On April 23rd of this year, Derek Fildebrandt tweeted out this tweet saying, "AI is going to destroy us, so sort of us destroying us." Less than a week later, CBC pointed out that the Western Standard had begun to use AI illustrations for their opinion columns on real issues. Derek defended it because of the cost of actual pictures. But we're not done with the content side yet. The other side of the Western Standard is their video side, which is mostly talk, interviews, and a whole lot of commentary. Man, that format is just the absolute worst, isn't it? But the folks that have hosted shows for the Western Standard read like a veritable who's who of the current Alberta government. And the timing of some of those shows is a little questionable. In September of 2021, the UCP announced that Jason Kenney would submit to a leadership review, with the results being released on May 18th, 2022. Just over a month later, Uncensored began airing on the Western Standard. Uncensored was hosted by former Wildrose MLA and Danielle Smith bestie, Bruce McAllister. He moderated conversation between one of the primary architects of the Free Alberta Strategy / Alberta Sovereignty Act / former PC Wildrose and then again PC MLA Rob Anderson, and none other than Danielle Smith. Uncensored ran from November of 2021 to February 22nd, 2022. And that was pretty much immediately followed by the solo show for Danielle Smith, The Danielle Smith Show. That show started April 18th, after Smith had announced her intention to run in the next provincial election for the UCP as an MLA for Livingston McLeod, with its last episode running on May 18th, the same day as the leadership review results were announced. She announced her run for the UCP leadership the next day. So to be clear, Danielle Smith announced her candidacy for the UCP as an MLA and was given a profile-building show by the Western Standard, a very serious news outlet. But that wasn't the last proposed show for Danielle Smith with the Western Standard. On October 21st, 2022, the Western Standard debuted what they billed as hopefully the first of a series called Question Period, their version of Your Province, Your Premier.
Good day, I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and welcome to the hopefully the first of many question periods with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, joined by Alberta's newly elected Premier Danielle Smith. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Nice to be back on the Western Standard again.
It's wonderful to have you. So this is a new program. This is the first. We hope to make this a regular occurrence. We'll see how it goes.
It only ran the once. One can't help but wonder if there was some sort of contractual conflict with the actual Your Province, Your Premier. There's a lot more that we could get into with the Western Standard's content, but we feel pretty safe saying that many people would consider it biased, inflammatory, and poor quality journalism at best. So how do they make ends meet? Well, Derek spelled that out at a committee meeting for Bill C-18.
I want to know exactly how to evaluate the amount of money you get from publicities, and how from the les abonnements. How do you say abonnements? Subscriptions.
We receive, our revenue is split. It varies month to month, but on average, we're roughly 50% subscriptions, 50% advertising.
50% advertising and 50% memberships. So memberships and advertising are critically important to the Western Standard's ability to function. This reality was underscored in a conversation that Western Standard host and longtime Alberta firebrand Corey Morgan had with the Rebels' Sheila Gunn Reid.
So let's go further then on to C-18, because that really smacked us over here at the Western Standard. Yeah. We're still getting out to our subscribers, but it's really dramatically, of course, made it harder for us to reach new viewers, new readers, or even our existing ones. You know, it's just the nature of it. The more you can get the articles in front of people, the better you're going to get readership and reaching out.
Don't kid yourself. It hit us here at Rebel News too, because that's where a lot of our traffic comes from, is on Facebook and Instagram.
So it appears the biggest beef with C-18 was the response of Meta to block anyone identifying as news on their websites not only limited the growth of membership, but also engagements and advertising. And it's a critical part of their value proposition that the existing and current audience knows that they're independent and don't, as their website puts it, accept any government funding whatsoever. Let's take a quick look at the Oxford Dictionary definition of funding. Noun: money provided, especially by an organization or government, for a particular purpose. The action or practice of providing money for a particular purpose. And the Cambridge definition: money given by a government or organization for an event or activity. They received state funding for the project. So it seems safe to say that any time public money or funds are used for a purpose, that purpose can be described as funding. But that leaves us with some questions. The first question has to do with the sole source contract listed on the Government of Alberta's website. If you're unfamiliar, the government has a policy wherein any product or service that is sole sourced or that the government decides can only be obtained from one source that is valued at more than $10,000 must be disclosed to the public. So the Government of Alberta issued a sole source contract to the Western Standard under media library content that lasted 10 months starting in May of 2023 to March of 2024. But what exactly does media library content mean? You have to know what's coming next. Yup, we FOIP'd it. And we got 2 results back. The first result was interesting because not only did it provide an explanation of the services for the contract, but it also provided other contracts with other companies, presumably for context. And that result said that the contract that ends March 31st, 2024 is for an electronic feed of the Western Standard content into the CPE News Services Aggregator. The definition of CPE aggregator: CPE aggregates news content from more than 160 commercial media outlets, including 106 Alberta newspapers, 39 Alberta broadcast channels, plus 4 national or out-of-province newspapers. It pays for up to 90 days of copyright access and the right to make the content available across the government. All CPE contracts with media content providers are defined as sole sourced because each media outlet is the only source for its unique contents. It then included contracts for the Toronto Star, Hamilton Spectator, Red Deer Advocate, Red Deer Express, the Globe and Mail, Post Media, and the Canadian Press. What's fascinating about that, though, is that it appears that the Western Standard is the only independent news organization to get a contract for that service. The Rebel? Nope. True North? Nope. Press Progress? Nope. The Sprawl? Nope. The Narwhal? Nope. Tyee? Nope. We could go on. But in a day and age where there are more and more independent news organizations, the fact that it appears the only independent company that got this contract is the one that has previous relationships with the current Premier, Danielle Smith, the current Executive Director of the Office of the Premier, Rob Anderson, and the current Director of the Premier's Southern Office, Bruce McAllister, is definitely a little curious. But we said we got 2 FOIP results, didn't we? Because we didn't just want a summary, we wanted the contract. And we're glad we did, because it turns out it's not just the electronic feed of the Western Standard. It's a lot more. Perhaps most interesting are points 4 and 6. Point 4, the contractor grants the province a non-exclusive license to share the material with 600 users. Point 6, the contractor shall provide up to 100 memberships or accounts for government employees using a gov.ab.ca mailing address to enable viewing on the Western Standard online. So just to be clear, this isn't just for a flow of all of the Western Standard's content to the government aggregator that makes the content available across the government. It's also 100 monthly subscriptions paid for by taxpayers for government employees who presumably would have access anyways because of that content aggregator. Some might interpret that as the Western Standard billing the province for the same service twice, like for meals, or like for a residence or something. It's also worth noting that there are no current updated contracts, which suggests that the service of the government having to access the Western Standard's content was so crucial that it isn't actually needed anymore. But that absolutely isn't all. Because if you go to the Western Standard's website, you might notice some ads like these. Hey, did Derek ever say anything about how advertising works on their website?
It's taken us a long time to build up our capacity to sell advertising. I'm not entirely without sympathy for media that have talked about the collapse of the advertising model, Google has come in, like when we first started the Western Standard, we tried building Google ads, that auto-populate from Google in, and they just paid pennies on the dollar. It wasn't worth it, just made the website look ugly and gave virtually no money, so we took them out. But we had to painstakingly, over a few years, build our ability to directly sell ads to customers, and that's very difficult work. I hate it. It's really hard to find people who are good at that. But it is necessary to do for the media if they want to have any advertising side of it.
So, guess what we did? Why, we filed another FOIP. From October 6th, 2022 to December 31st, 2023, the government of Alberta paid the Western Standard to run at least 20 ad series. The kicker is that we got these FOIP results faster than expected because apparently the Western Standard found it acceptable to release the campaigns. But it also appears, based on the codes that were used to redact the total amounts paid, they didn't want the amounts that they charged for advertising getting released. We looked through the Western Standard's advertising section to find their posted prices, the ones Derek referred to in his Senate testimony.
They're willing to pay our posted rate.
And they don't appear to be publicly listed or posted. We reached out to their advertising email and we didn't get any response. We reached out to the Vice President of Operations for the Western Standard asking for both comment and the advertising rates. We then sent an email stating that we would like to advertise the breakdown using one of the same banner ads that the Western Standard sells to the government of Alberta. Again, the Western Standard refused to provide the advertising rates, which is wild given that Derek had said in his testimony at the Senate, quote, "I'll sell ads to Saudi Arabia if they're willing to pay our posted rate. We've offered to sell ads to the Alberta New Democratic Party and other smaller political parties. We have private businesses and not-for-profit organizations that advertise." So, despite being unable to get the Western Standard to disclose their advertising rates to us as an inquiry and then as a prospective client, they were unwilling to. But they did provide us with the comment. The Western Standard was happy to participate in the information released in your FOI. We sell advertising and corporate subscriptions to businesses and governments at competitive rates on a strictly fee-for-service basis. The Western Standard has never accepted government media subsidies. So it appears the position of the Western Standard is that they don't have advertising rates per se. They work that out with each specific client. Now, we have filed FOIP requests in the past and have gotten totals. So it's fascinating that the government and the Western Standard seem to believe that you, as taxpayers, have no right to know how much money is being funneled to the Premier's former media partner for banner ads. Regardless, we have filed an appeal with the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner to try to find out how much money taxpayers are sending the Western Standard for advertising in banner ads, which as of the date of this recording, we and you as taxpayers still very much are. This screenshot was taken on May 19th, 2024. But we do have one last theory that we wanted to throw into the mix. At the end of January 2021, the Western Standard tweeted out their frustration that Facebook had blocked the Western Standard from paying to promote an article on a young man from Arizona who had gotten the wrong COVID test and was taken to an isolation hotel, which fits because that requirement had been brought in starting January 7th, 2021. So there was no scoop here, but the Western Standard felt it was worth paying to have this story amplified. Now, obviously, this was a pretty sensationalistic story, and the way the story was told by the Western Standard was even more sensationalistic. The original story read, "A Red Deer mom has told of her anguish after watching her son being detained at the Calgary airport, loaded into a van, and taken to an undisclosed isolation center. Rebecca McDonald was at the airport late Saturday night, hoping to welcome her son Ethan back to Calgary from Arizona. McDonald hadn't seen her son for 2 years." What's left out, and that is certainly pertinent, is the son was a 20-year-old man who had been living in Arizona as an adult for 2 years. But that's an aside. The fact is, it's incredibly unusual that a news organization would pay Facebook to promote a specific story, because that turns into a question of what stories get boosted, what's the criteria, what stories deserve it, which ones don't. Thanks to the ads library feature on Facebook, we checked on a few of the other major news networks in Calgary. Neither CBC nor CTV have ever run ads. And while it looks like someone at Global created an ad for a home show event, it's never run. What has the Western Standard been up to? At least before their content was blocked by Facebook. They have spent thousands of dollars advertising their website, their content, and some of their, let's go with, more inflammatory stories. What do all of these ads direct people to? The Western Standard's website. Now, the Western Standard loves to talk about what a big deal they are because of the volume of traffic that their website sees. One could imagine someone hypothesizing that part of what helps them determine what to charge people who want to advertise on their site is the amount of traffic they can demonstrate that their website gets. People like the government of Alberta with taxpayers' money. But Meta shutting down advertising rules could have changed all of that. Remember what that Rebel News personality said?
Don't kid yourself. It hit us here at Rebel News too, because that's where a lot of our traffic comes from, is on Facebook and Instagram.
Now, to be very clear, this is just a theory. We absolutely aren't saying that's what was happening. No claims here, just theories. On an additional note, last year, Gail McGowan outed none other than leader and black belt master of Take Back Alberta, David Parker, as a part owner of the Western Standard. And we took a cursory look at the number of Western Standard pieces involving David Parker. Out of roughly a dozen, we found 2 that identified Parker as a shareholder of the Western Standard. The rest apparently felt it was unnecessary to disclose that. This despite the fact that Derek Fildebrandt has publicly said any story covering Parker must, because of a standing order, disclose that fact. But in fairness, David is only a small shareholder, just a tiny little one, tiny. But we can't help but think that maybe there's a bigger question that still needs to be asked. It's probably a given that the Western Standard would claim that accepting funding for advertising is totally different than accepting funding that's part of a bailout. But that doesn't address the concern that given that both advertising and memberships are critical to the Western Standard, there is the risk of advertising and membership money influencing the Western Standard's stories and editorial standards. If only there was a publisher who could speak to how unavoidable that cross-contamination is.
You have to do your very best to try and have a firewall in place between your advertisers and your newsrooms. And most journalists will also know, particularly in smaller publications where it's not hundreds of people in a building where you can physically separate each other. Back in the 90s, maybe the advertising department would never meet the news department. But you have to try your very best to have a firewall in place. But it is impossible to 100% separate it. Any publisher who tells you otherwise is probably lying, which is one reason that direct government funding of the media is so dangerous.
So Derek knows that accepting advertising revenue will influence a newsroom, despite the best efforts to build a firewall. But his own newsroom has demonstrated that they seem to be incapable of managing or even following his standing orders for disclosure with any consistency. So given all of this, given that the Western Standard has pre-existing relationships with the current premier, the executive director of her office, the executive director of her southern office, and given that Derek tried to engage her in an ongoing Your Province, Your Premier style show exclusive to his network, and given that the Western Standard has demonstrated that their newsroom can't follow internal instructions on disclosures for potential conflicts of interests, and that their publisher acknowledges that advertising revenue can influence editorial and story decisions, and given that the Western Standard's whole sales pitch to its membership is that it's free from government influence, how does the Western Standard reconcile its acceptance of taxpayers' money from the provincial government on multiple fronts, with some of those ongoing, with its seeming position that accepting government money corrupts the integrity of a newsroom? Or to put it another way, let's assume words mean what words mean and funding means taxpayers' money spent on a thing. The Western Standard may not accept funding from the federal government that they despise, but they will happily accept funding from the current government that is run in no small measure by its former employees. So maybe it's worth asking how the Western Standard can say, "The Western Standard proudly refuses to accept any government funding whatsoever. Our readers know this and is important in building a trustable brand with a large readership across Western Canada." Or at least how they can say it with a straight face. But let's be really clear here. There's nothing wrong with governments investing in journalism in an arm's length manner. Because again, the foundation of any healthy democracy is a well-informed electorate. And an electorate is well-informed because it's being provided with quality, objective journalism. But it does seem like there's maybe something wrong with condemning all the other media for accepting government funding and claiming that you don't accept government funding in order to try to manufacture the perception that you're better than all the other media because you know that money equals influence no matter what you do, when you are in fact accepting government funding yourself. Now, earlier this week, we sent Derek an invitation for a live interview after this show to discuss everything that we've raised here. We never received a response. But maybe Derek was just too busy filming tampons and other men in a bathroom.
This is Derek Fildebrandt of the Western Standard. I'm the Ottawa International Airport. And I came to take a leak before my flight. And, well, I just found some that we've reported on, but I just never really believed it was too stupid to really be real. This is, you're seeing backwards on my camera here, but that is napkin serviette. I think that's a maxi pad, more or less, and a tampon. I assure you, I am not in the ladies' room. I'm in a federally regulated men's room. So, I don't mean to take federal resources from taxpayers here, but I'm going to get a... Oh no, there's no more taxi pads for my dick. Let me try tampon. Okay, there's no more out, but I do have a tampon here. The machine appears to be out of maxi pads and tampons for men. But here we go. This is from me in the men's room at a federally regulated bathroom in the People's Republic of Canada. God bless you, people.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.